there were so many girls and young women who are now grown women today who were victims of abuse, neglect, spiritual abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, just so many wrong things because it stemmed from a wrong view of women. It stemmed from a view of women as being just those who do the dishes, who cook the meals, who bear the babies. Each of those roles and responsibilities is beautiful and important. They're not mundane in light of eternity, so you'll never hear me say that, but those were not the only things for which women were created.
That was Rebecca Hargraves, who grew up in the stay-at-home daughter movement, an ideology that women should stay at home under their father's authority until they're married. Rebecca is a Christian, a wife, a mother of two, a podcast host, and an author of several books about biblical womanhood. I'm Joanna Adams. I grew up in Montana, where there was a fairly large homeschool and religious community. Many families like mine were traditional and conservative, and the stay-at-home daughter movement was something I became familiar with. Through this 4-part series, I explore the movement through the eyes of 5 women who experienced it, including Rebecca. Some of these women I knew already. Some I met during the process of creating this project. They all bring unique experiences and perspectives, but they were all taught one common principle: daughters should stay at home. This is episode 1, Relationships in the Stay-at-Home Daughter Movement. Emily Elizabeth Anderson was an enthusiastic stay-at-home daughter. She was counseled under one of the religious leaders of the movement, an experience that ultimately ended in her joining a lawsuit against him for sexual harassment. Emily explained to me the system of courtship. Courtship is one of the bedrocks of the stay-at-home daughter movement. Relationships started from a distance and largely stayed that way. It was a hard departure from typical dating, with marriage sitting at the center of any interaction.
First of all, the male initiates. And so a young man is ideally, he's supposed to spot a young woman from the distance and observe her from the distance. So that way he gets to understand her true nature. Versus if he were to just approach her, maybe she would get all infatuated and want to put on a front. So the idea was get to know each other. If you have interest, keep it secret. But get to know each other in a group setting, so you can try to observe their true nature and character. And then if the young man is further interested, then he approaches the girl's father. At that point, the father and the young man have pretty in-depth discussions. And I've heard stories where a father would develop a deep relationship and have weekly grilling sessions with a young man for up to 2 years. Wow. Where he's discipling this young man. He is essentially dating. It's the guy it's the father that's dating the guy, essentially, and trying to decide if this young man is worthy of his daughter. And if so, and he feels safe with that, then he will give the young man permission to start a courtship. And at that point, the father goes to the daughter, says, this young man's interested in you. I think he's a good guy. And so at that point, they begin an intentional relationship where they are examining each other for marriage potential and having chaperoned interactions with each other. Families will go out to dinner with each other. Families will invite each other to homes or whatnot. And so it's always still this group, this family dating group interaction. And if they really start to get serious, some families might allow the young couple to start texting each other, usually with the parents involved in a group chat. So all text messages are still supervised. Any kind of phone calls are usually supervised, anything like that. And as they continue to get to know each other and start to feel yes, this person is suitable for marriage, then they would enter an engagement still keeping all the chaperone rules, no physical touch, no physical contact whatsoever. And then when they get married, that's when they're allowed to create an emotional connection. I remember specifically being taught, not only are you not allowed to have any kind of physical intimacy, and where I'm not just talking sex, I'm talking, some couples couldn't hold hands. Certainly you couldn't kiss before you were married. So not only were you not supposed to make any kind of physical connection in intimacy, you were not supposed to create or build any emotional intimacy, because the theory was the more emotional intimacy you built, the more tempted you are to become physically intimate. And that was not okay. So it was really sad because it set up a lot of couples for failure because they were essentially marrying a stranger.
The courtship movement was not exclusive to the stay-at-home daughter movement. It was popular among conservative Christians and homeschool communities in the 90s, and the ideologies went hand in hand with the stay-at-home daughter movement. I Kissed Dating Goodbye by Joshua Harris spearheaded the movement. Harris described the book as, quote, calling young adults away from playing the dating game and revealing how they can live a lifestyle of sincere love, true purity, and purposeful singleness. Over 1 million copies of the book sold. It prioritized getting to know people in groups rather than one-on-one. Friendship mattered more than romance. For Rebecca, she didn't date at all.
And part of that was a belief that I kind of still hold to, that I didn't want to date around. I didn't want to go too far, so to speak, with all these different men. You know, there was a part of that I don't regret. I did marry my first boyfriend. And so for some people that seems insane. It worked for us. We got to know each other first as friends really well for several years. He was a buddy of mine. He spent a lot of time with my family. We did a lot of family outings together, not one-on-one dates for a long time, but family outings, got to know each other. And really looking back, I see that I didn't need to date him, first of all, to get to know him really well on a very deep level. And I probably got to know him deeper, quicker, because we saw each other in all different circumstances and we're not just strictly dating. But he did become my first boyfriend, and we did get married 2 years after we started dating, which that's very rare in the stay-at-home daughterhood movement. Usually you have a very short courtship, a very short engagement, and then you're married all in one fell swoop a lot of times. And I wouldn't say I regret that. We saved our first kiss for our wedding day. That's very common in the movement. I wouldn't say I regret any of that. But I do believe there is a lot of legalism all throughout the movement, but also in this area. There's no hard and fast rule, biblically speaking, against kissing before you're married. I do think there are purity standards. I do think that sex is a gift that God reserves for marriage for us, for it to be enjoyed in its best possible way. Without baggage and pain and heartbreak. But beyond that, I think there's a lot of extra biblical man-made teachings surrounding dating and relationships and things of that nature. It worked well for me. It worked out, but I feel like that's more of God's grace than it is the mindset or movement being biblical. But no, you're definitely not encouraged to date in this movement.
Purity standards meant preserving yourself for marriage. The less physical contact before the altar, the better. Martha Ardiomenko grew up in a small town in Montana and was virtually never alone with her husband before their wedding day. I've known Martha for years. She's a mother of 4 children and was heavily involved in the homeschool community I grew up in. She's an author and a property manager, although her journey to where she is now was hardly smooth.
I was really pressured to be thinking about getting married.
At 18?
Yeah. Well,
Sure.
This was even before that, 17. It was like, you should be thinking about who you could marry. And we lived in Libby. So
Sure.
there wasn't a lot of people.
Right. Not a lot of options to choose from.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking, yeah, no, this is not going to work. Well, my, it was basically a step above an arranged marriage.
Okay. So not so.
I didn't know him.
Okay.
I had met him 2 months before.
Before you got married?
Yeah, or
Okay.
4 months before. And then we were engaged for 2 months. There was this huge push at that point in the 90s to, courtship, stay-at-home daughters, the good parents, they do this stuff. You take care of and kind of dictate your children's lives. There was Bill Gothard, and we didn't fit quite into all their boxes to do like ATI.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a lot of it though with my friends.
Okay.
Their parents. As far as like courtship, we didn't really even have a courting time period because we were never alone together, ever.
Okay.
One time I think we sat on the stairs alone together, and my mom said that she thought that would be a good idea so that maybe we could talk, and she got in trouble.
Even though Martha didn't know her now ex-husband very well, she still made it to the altar for her wedding day. The way she talks about it is hardly a fairy tale, and the relationship that followed the wedding was laced with the pressure of acting and talking the right way to her new husband.
The only thing I remember from the ceremony sermon was he said, "So if your wife and your donkey fall into the river, you need to save your wife and not the donkey."
Okay.
I remember thinking, isn't that assumed?
Like, why is this a question? Exactly.
Yeah, why is this being talked about? But that was the only thing I remembered. Well, he was so into his sermon, he forgot to do wedding vows.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So you got married without him?
Yeah. So then they had the parents come up and like lay hands on us and pray for us. And that was it. No, kiss.
But a first kiss, right?
No, we didn't do
no
any
kissing.
of that.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was kind of like, okay, that this is weird, but I don't feel very good. So of course you're not speaking up very much.
Right.
And of course I had been teaching myself, not to speak up.
Right.
And it just kind of went downhill from there. Here I'm somebody who's very sheltered, very, so I end up going to like a bookstore and I'm looking at trying to find marriage books to figure out like what on earth am I supposed to be doing? Because I'm too embarrassed to ask someone because I think I should know this, right?
Right.
Everyone should know how to do. I think we've been married only a couple months and we were going to get paint at the hardware store and walking to the hardware store and I walked in front of him.
Oh, okay.
And I heard, I think, probably 40 minute lecture on why you should never walk in front of your husband.
And why was that?
It was very disrespectful. It was disrespecting his authority and his, place in the house. And you're like showing that you're in charge, not him. And so you needed to make sure that you were always thinking and aware of where you were, what you were doing, how you were talking.
Trista Anderson's experience was a bit different. We had a fascinating conversation about the polygamous cult she grew up in that took gender roles a step further. The community strived to adhere to Old Testament culture and messianic philosophies that eventually led to polygamy. In her community, church elders became involved before parents did.
Growing up so sheltered.
Okay.
We weren't allowed to date at all. We didn't even court, really. So what was supposed to happen was if a guy had an interest in one of the girls, he had to go to the elder and ask the elder for permission to marry her. Then the elder would go to the girl and ask her if she was willing to. And then the girl had to give an answer of yes or no, if she was willing to or not, before anybody else knew anything about it. Once the girl answered, if she said no, nobody else was supposed to know about it at all. End of story, period, like as if it never happened. If she said yes, then the elder would go to the girl's dad and to her parents and get permission from her parents. Once her parents gave permission, then it would be announced to the church that they were engaged.
Okay, so you've got basically the first time people are even hearing about this relationship, you're engaged, you're getting married.
Yep, exactly.
So there's not really a time.
No dating, no getting to know this person. I mean, unless you somehow miraculously grew up with this person, which didn't happen on our community because we just didn't have that many people. Yeah. So this guy comes on the land and I looked at him and I'm like, oh no, not this. Nope. He's 15 years older than me. And I was not interested in him in any way, shape, or form. Not at all. Well, come to find out, 3 months later, I think it was 4 months later, the elder of the church comes to me and tells me that this guy wants to marry me.
Wow, okay.
And that it's a matter of salvation.
Oh, so if you don't marry him, you're not a Christian. You can't be.
The way I took it as a 19-year-old being told that, this is the first time I've ever had anybody show really much any interest in me at all. I mean, even the guy that I grew up with and loved seriously for many years, wasn't open about it, so it was I looked at it and I'm like, okay, so don't take too long in making your decision because this is a matter of salvation. To my 19-year-old brain that is doing everything I can to simply follow the Lord, I took that as, okay, if I say no and he chooses to leave the Lord, because I knew he was a struggling young Christian. If he chooses to leave the Lord, then it's my fault. I still remember. So when that got asked of me, I was like, I don't want to marry him. I have absolutely no interest in him whatsoever. Zilch.
Sure.
Actually, he drove me nuts because he's a totally different personality. And so I was like, I don't want to. I don't have any desire even to get married at this time. And it's not who I want to marry if I do. I'm extremely music oriented and stuff. The guy can't sing to save his life. I finally just was like, I'll say yes because, well, Lord, if it's not your will, get me out of it, please. That was my response. Then they went to my dad, and my dad comes to me and he's like, why are you doing this? Because my mom and I were having a lot of problems at the time. And he thought that I was doing it to get away from the home because I just wanted to be away from mom.
Trista said the tension between her and her mom came from the mismatch in how each of her parents dealt with the rules of the community.
There's always been a lot of tension between my mom and I. The whole movement, I would say, actually increased that tension because my mom didn't go along with a lot of what was said. She was pretty strongly against a lot of it, whereas my dad kind of more of a go with the flow sort of thing. And so me being pretty close to my dad, as far as I felt like I could, kind of daddy's girl sort of a thing going on there. And knowing that she was against it just made it just more friction between her and I, because I always felt well, she's against everybody that matters to me. She's against everything that matters to me. And I've always been kind of an old-fashioned soul. It's my sisters and I grew up wishing that we grew up in the Old West. The belief system was very anti-woman. I don't know how to put into words how strongly the women were oppressed. And she was not a big fan of any of that. She was much more outspoken and not afraid to speak her mind, and that kind of gets into a lot of trouble in those sort of cults. That's literally what it is. She had reservations from the very get-go because, I mean, we were told right away from practically day one that we had to start wearing long dresses and head coverings. And so, I mean, I was still going to public school when I started wearing a full head covering and a long dress, and I did it of my own free will, but I had also been, I was also very open to different cultures and stuff. My mom had a lot harder time with it not because of the whole modesty thing. She always pushed on us from very young about not, just flaunting our body out and whatever. She already had a moral belief system. So, I mean, to her, I think this was just like, I think she saw it for what it was right away and struggled with not having the authority to do anything about it. Clothing wise and stuff, where it was like, I told her I could dress in a paper sack and I still wouldn't be modest enough. As far as like school, she was always very supportive of school. We wouldn't have had the funding for me to do anything, and they wouldn't have, I remember when I was in my later teens, I wanted to study midwifery. And I had found a college or a school that I had wanted to go to and did research on it to make sure that it was actually the one I wanted to do. And they let me do all of that research and stuff, but it was always like I was never going to actually be able to go. Beyond that, I don't know if they would have let me or not anyways.
Okay, sure. So let's go back to now you're engaged to this guy. How much time do you have between engagement and marriage?
Well, for that, we actually pushed for it to be earlier than what my parents wanted. My mom wanted me to wait until like the fall or winter. I saw absolutely no reason for that because I'm like,
Time? Or what time is this, that time of year that you're engaged?
We were engaged in the spring. It was April, I think. And we were married in July.
So very strict
Very
standard.
strict. You're never allowed to be alone together, ever.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Always had to have a chaperone. And so I got to see him once every 2 weekends.
Okay. So how would you say that affected your kind of relationship as you're working to develop a relationship with this guy and you're seeing him every other weekend and that's not even times when you can be alone?
It affected a lot because I didn't know this guy. I mean, we had the very first time we had met even like ever was that November. So, I mean, we had only known him like 4 months before he asked to marry me. It was like we did not know anything about each other. He would have been okay with me taking off the head covering as long as I'm at home. With me wearing pants around the house and stuff like that, because that's not how he grew up and he didn't see anything wrong with it. I, on the other hand, because that's how I was raised to believe that that's what was right, I was very strict about what I would allow. Whereas he would have been okay with me going out and getting a job. That wasn't really, it was okay as long as it was someplace that was approved, or doing something that was approved.
Is it safe to say that your husband has a lot of decision making kind of in this relationship now that you have?
Definitely. Oh yeah, definitely. Because when things would have first started with being, more of an equal relationship, it was really pretty quickly enforced upon him by the elders of the community that what he was allowing me to do wasn't okay. Because he was fine with me taking care of paying the bills, making sure our finances were in order, doing the grocery shopping, doing whatever. All of a sudden, I find out that I'm not allowed to pay the bills now because the women shouldn't be in charge of the finances.
On top of dealing with the unexpected marital trouble, shortly after her marriage began, the community broke up and was reduced to 3 families, Trista's included. That's when the idea of polygamy came in.
And there was only 3 families left. Mine was one of them.
Wow.
And right after polygamy got brought in and the community broke up, the remaining elder brought in, which happened to be the one that asked me to, that basically the guy that I followed. He also brought in a very strongly heavy Messianic Jewish belief system with it. And so that's where I was able to start seeing a lot of the connection between culture and Old Testament beliefs and all of that. And I feel like a lot of this stay-at-home daughter movement and even stay-at-home woman, whatever you want to call it, where just, the woman has her place and that's it. A lot of it is stemmed from that culture. And a lot of Christians want to shy away from that. A lot of Christians want to be like, oh, well, you can't, just say that this particular teaching in the Bible is just culture, and so you don't have to pay attention to it. Hello, people, it is culture. It is exactly what it is. It is not fundamental beliefs. It is culture. And every culture has their own ways. About 2 years after, about a year after we were married, this polygamy doctrine came in.
Sure.
And, I was told that the only way to save my marriage was to have another wife in it.
Out of frustration, Trista ultimately agreed to another woman marrying her husband.
And I got sick and tired of listening to my ex come home drunk, well, my husband at the time, come home drunk telling me how much better this other sister on the land was than I was. And since she happened to be a friend of mine, I was like, well, might as well let her be part of the family.
Sure. So you're like, I'm better off to have somebody that's, a friend and I know.
Exactly, right?
Sure.
And then I wouldn't have to put up with listening to that anymore. It just made it worse. I think that goes to actually speak a lot on the whole thing, because the polygamy part was brought in to try to bring us women under more submission. I mean, the whole thing was in fight of the Jezebel spirit.
While Trista tried to go with the flow and accepted many of the beliefs she was raised with, Deanna Coughlin didn't understand what was so wrong about the feelings she had for boys. Deanna's father worked at Vision Forum, one of the ministries that espoused the stay-at-home daughter lifestyle.
And I started growing up and getting romantic feelings for, this boy that I liked. And I was met with just a lot of shame and a lot of repression. Like, we don't do that. We don't feel those things. You don't talk about those things. That's girl lust, and lust is a sin.
How old would have you been when, you
13 or so.
13. Okay, sure. And
their philosophy was that there's no reason to get involved with someone in a romantic sense unless you think it's somebody that you really might marry.
Okay.
There's no reason to even explore that with somebody unless you are actually ready to get married.
Okay. So you're 13, kind of got a crush. Was it your age then at that point where they were concerned?
At that point, yeah. They were like, you're a kid, you don't need to be thinking about this or indulging this. You should put your energy into something else. Any of us, I just got angry and annoyed because I felt like I was just being shut down for no reason. I personally didn't think that there was anything wrong with having a crush on a boy or wanting to hold hands with the boy that I liked that liked me. And so it just sort of turned into a Romeo and Juliet. The perfect process would have looked like me not showing any overt interest in anybody until I was probably about 18 or so. And if I developed mutual feelings with a boy, they wanted for him to go to them before he ever said anything about it to me and get approval to court. And then it would be a very parent-dictated process from that point where we would be allowed to get to know each other. And the idea was that our parents would discuss the match and like give their go ahead as it progressed, and that marriage would just be the natural outcome of getting to know each other very gradually.
Sure. So a lot of parental involvement.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The control Deanna's parents had over her and any potential relationship she might be interested in affected the relationship she had with her parents.
My relationship with my parents, it affected me negatively. And those things that you mentioned, get a driver's license, no. I got my driver's license when I was 21.
Oh, wow.
I had to get my boyfriend to teach me after I got a divorce.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, what was the second thing again?
A cell phone.
Yeah, I got my first cell phone when I was 18, and
you got it on your own.
They could take my phone and look at my browser history and look at my call and text history if they wanted to know what I had been up to. But
was that something they did when you turned 18, or did you stick it out for a little bit longer?
I tried to move out when I was 18, but I did not think to take my Social Security card and my birth certificate with me, and my dad hid them. So I wasn't able to get my driver's license or a job while I was making my bid for freedom. So I ended up having to come home after a month.
Okay. How was that? What was that like coming back home at that point?
Well, I had just moved out into my grandma's house. So I wasn't just out on the streets trying to make it on my own. Coming back was very awkward because there was no settling back into normal.
Right.
After a big decision like that had been made and then unmade. Siblings just tried to maintain what normal they could in terms of relating to me. But when I was living with a man out of wedlock was when I was excommunicated from the church I grew up in.
Okay.
And that was when my parents said, we don't want you coming to the house. We don't want you talking to the kids. For the very hardcore stay-at-home people, no, not really.
When reflecting back on her childhood, Deanna has thoughts on how she would want to raise her own daughters.
I would be able to raise them to that point and still be their friend, because I felt like I could never really talk to either of my parents about the things I was going through, because they didn't really listen. They would just sort of categorize what I was talking about and preach at me about it.
Okay.
So I would really hope to raise daughters who could talk to me, who I could be honest with, because I have friends who are just a couple of days younger than me who talk to their mom like every day. Yeah. And it's beautiful. And I wish I could have had that.
In the next episode, we'll explore Vision Forum and other groups that held up the stay-at-home daughter movement through lectures, Bible studies, and literature. Thank you for listening to The Daughters, a documentary examining the stay-at-home daughter movement with myself as the host, Joanna Adams. Thank you to Jake Musiker for audio production. Writing and editing by Shalom Bear G. Music credit to the Aegis Destroyer by PC3. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Post about it on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow the show on Facebook at The Daughters Docu and on this podcast's website, www.thedaughtersdocu.com.